Calendars, November 8th in New York. That's when and where America's top diplomat, Mike Pompeo, is going to hold talks with the right-hand man of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. On the agenda, the regime's denuclearization. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirms South Korea is among 8 nations receiving exemptions to U.S. sanctions that target Iran's energy, banking and shipping sectors. With the campaigning winding down, Americans prepare to vote R or D for who they want to see in the House and Senate. We also take a look at how the results could affect the Trump administration's diplomacy with North Korea. We start, though, with some news just in within the past hour or so. North Korea and the United States are finally going to be sitting down for high-level talks some 5 months after their summit in Singapore. The U.S. State Department says Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Kim Yong-chol, the head of Pyongyang's intelligence agency, will meet in New York on Thursday to discuss denuclearization and the implementation of the Singapore Summit Declaration. Washington added that Stephen Biegun, U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, is also taking part in the talks. Military officials from the two Koreas and the UN command are holding talks to discuss opening the JSA for visitors in the future. According to Seoul's Defense Ministry, the three-way talks began a few minutes ago at the Freedom House on the South Korean side of the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom. The three sides are reviewing the JSA's disarmament, which took place in late October. They are also expected to talk about how the security personnel from the south and north will be stationed in each other's area and the ways to install surveillance equipment and share information. The South Korean government is breathing a sigh of relief this morning after it was confirmed that Seoul has been granted a waiver from the latest US sanctions on Iran. The US State Department's decision means South Korea is free to import oil from Iran without fear of economic repercussions from Washington. EG1 reports.
With the 180-day grace period coming to an end on Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin announced the return of U.S. sanctions on Iran.
We are making it abundantly clear to the Iranian regime that they will face mounting financial isolation until they fundamentally change their destabilizing behavior. These powerful sanctions directly target Iran's banking, energy, and shipping sectors.
Pompeo said 8 countries would be granted waivers from the sanctions as they had significantly reduced their purchases of Iranian crude over the past 6 months.
We have decided to issue temporary allotments to a handful of countries, responsive both to the specific circumstances and to ensure a well-supplied oil market. The U.S. will be granting these exemptions to China, India, Italy, Greece, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Turkey.
The waivers will last up to 180 days, but are extendable. Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry says the decision means South Korea will be able to maintain a stable supply level of Iranian condensate or ultralight oil, but exact figures were not disclosed. South Korea heavily depends on Iranian oil. An official at the ministry said over half of the country's daily imports of condensate barrels last year were from Iran. Seoul is also free to maintain its current financial transactions with Iran's sanctioned central bank. The two countries have been trading oil and other products by paying and receiving Korean won through the Iranian central bank's accounts at 2 South Korean banks. Since South Korea's currency has low convertibility, the official said, the negotiating team assured the U.S. that this method of transaction will not allow U.S. dollars or other foreign currencies to flow into Iran. The U.S. sanctions on Tehran comes as the Trump administration withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran in May, saying it had not stopped Iran from developing its ballistic missile program and intervening in neighboring countries. While Pompeo said more than 20 importing nations have already zeroed out their imports of Iranian crude, he warned the U.S. will continue negotiations to get all of the nations to zero. 이지원, Arirang News.
Now, Iran has the fourth largest proved crude oil reserves in the world, and South Korea is one of the Islamic Republic's best customers. Our Gov't Hee spoke to some experts to see how they think the Trump administration's new sanctions could affect the South Korean economy.
South Korean companies relying on trade with Iran were relieved to hear South Korea was granted temporary exemptions from Washington sanctions on Tehran that have snapped back into place. But the waiver, while extendable, only lasts up to 180 days, and local experts are divided on how this could affect the South Korean economy. Some say the sanctions will lead to rising international oil prices due to slumping supply. For instance, Goldman Sachs estimates that Iranian crude exports will fall to 1.15 million barrels a day by the end of the year, down from 2.5 million barrels in mid-2018. High international oil prices are not only likely to negatively affect local firms' overall business sentiment, but also raise producer and consumer prices. The problem is especially serious for South Korea because the nation's crude oil imports rely heavily on Iran.
In 2017, Iran was the third largest provider of crude oil to South Korea when comparing imports. Saudi Arabia was the biggest and Kuwait second. U.S. sanctions on Iran might lead to energy supply problems in South Korea.
Others say the economic impact will be limited because there are other ways to overcome supply shortages.
Other oil-producing countries such as Saudi Arabia or Iraq are likely to increase production. They can boost their exports and make up for any shortages from Iran.
The first round of U.S. sanctions on Tehran in August negatively affected South Korea's overall trade with Iran. According to a report released by the Korea International Trade Association in September, South Korea's exports to Iran marked $140 million in August, down more than 40% compared to the previous month. But what's more important, according to experts, are import numbers, since South Korea's exports to Iran accounted for less than 0.5% of the country's total export in the first 9 months of this year. Imports plunged by almost 70% in August compared to the previous month, with crude oil accounting for most of the outbound shipments. Gov't Hee, Arirang News.
Now, tens of millions of Americans will begin heading to the polls in the coming hours to cast their ballots in the 2018 midterms, elections touted by many US media outlets as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. While the polls don't give us a clear indication of what might happen, we thought, in the meantime, we'd find out how the different outcomes could affect the Trump administration's North Korea policy. Our Park Hee-jun met with some experts here in Seoul for their insights. So let's take a look.
These midterm elections in the U.S. are particularly important for the Korean Peninsula, as the outcome is directly linked to the future direction of nuclear negotiations with North Korea. Right after the elections, North Korea and the U.S. will hold high-level talks to make progress on the North's denuclearization and sort out the details of a second summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump planned for early next year. So the midterms are of immediate concern for the Korean Peninsula. There are 4 possible scenarios, but the latest poll suggests the most probable one is where Republicans maintain control of the Senate and Democrats win back the House. According to one expert, for South Korea, that outcome would complicate the ongoing peace drive, including inter-Korean cooperation projects. The Trump administration will lose some of its political clout to push through the president's plans to engage the North.
I think the human rights issue will be raised by the Democrats, and also more pressure on North Korea will be raised by Democrats in the Congress, which is contradictory to the President Trump's policy, which is negotiation. So all in all, I think President Trump will be, isolated positions by Congress as far as the North Korea policy is concerned.
And so there may be a change of pace, but a different expert doesn't expect much to change from the status quo, even if Democrats regain control of Congress.
Obviously, from next year going on, the United States is going to go into election period in the second half of the year. So probably leading up to that point, the first half, we might see a little stalemate and postponing everything, every process, and try to keep everything under control and manageable.
President Trump will have to seek support from Democrats for a successful outcome with North Korea, but ultimately it comes down to President Trump's response, whether he will push for dialogue with the regime and its denuclearization as he has up until this point. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
So we are just ahead of the US midterms, of course. The two major parties in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats, are both vying for control both of the House and the Senate. So how exactly do the US midterms actually work? Cha Sang-mi explains.
So here's what the US midterms are all about. Halfway through the president's four-year term, there's a congressional election. That's why they're called the midterms. In the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, all 435 seats are up for grabs. Those seats are apportioned based on the relative population of each state. So California gets the most with 53 seats. Montana gets 1. The members serve two-year terms. In the upper chamber, the Senate, there are 100 seats, with each state getting 2 regardless of population. But this time around, only about a third of them are up for grabs because senators serve for 6 years. So right now, Republicans control both chambers. In the House, they have around 40 more seats than the Democrats. It's much tighter in the Senate, where the Republicans have only 2 more. Having Republicans in control of both houses has been crucial to President Trump, getting his tax cut through and appointing 2 Supreme Court justices, to name just a few things. Both the House and the Senate have to agree on a bill for it to go to the president and be signed into law. But in some respects, the two chambers' roles are different. For example, only the House can create tax bills, and only the Senate can confirm presidential nominees. Also, the House is where proceedings begin for impeachment. Some races are easy to call in districts that always vote either Republican or Democrat, but other ones could be really close. For example, a close Trump ally, Devin Nunes from California, is in a tight race. So is Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Also, the Speaker of the House, Republican Paul Ryan, is stepping down. So if the Republicans win, they will pick a new Speaker. And if the Democrats take the House, they will likely choose a veteran progressive from San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi. Some American pundits have called it the most important midterm election in their lifetimes. It remains to be seen, but for now, the latest polling data shows the House leans in favor of the Democrats, and the Senate is likely to go to the Republicans. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Yes, and Sang-mi will be joining me in the studio this time tomorrow so we can digest the results of the US midterms as they come in. So we hope you tune in for that. Now, we're going to switch back to some domestic news now. And the big meeting on Monday between South Korea's presidential office, the government and the various rival political parties. The aim was to bring the different sides together on crunch issues, including economic revitalization, much needed here in South Korea at the moment, and Seoul's policies towards North Korea. So how did it go? Our Shin Se-min reports.
The leaders of the 5 political parties and members of the government gathered at one table to hammer out issues facing the nation during Monday's inaugural gathering of the Joint Policy Consultative Meeting. From domestic affairs like the local economy to fast-evolving diplomacy, including North Korea, the leaders put their heads together to find some answers and some areas where they can work together. On diplomacy, President Moon and the rival party leaders have agreed to give bipartisan support to lasting peace and ultimate denuclearization of the divided peninsula, while agreeing to push for a meeting of the parliaments of both Koreas. The attendees also talked about that high-profile visit from North Korea, scheduled initially to take place this year. The ruling party's floor leader, during a briefing at the parliament, quoted President Moon as saying that the administration is continuing to prepare for a visit to Seoul by leader Kim Jong-un under the supposition that he's coming by the year's end. On domestic issues, the parties and the government agreed to provide support for small businesses and low-income earners while ensuring fair hiring and reconciliation between labor and management. The joint statement also said that the top office and the rival parties have agreed to move forward with bills on deregulation, on tackling low birth rates, and on protecting the Korean people from crime and drunk driving. They also agreed to start a discussion on lowering the legal voting age to 18 and other electoral reforms. And all of that, as President Moon had stressed, comes amid the importance of bipartisan cooperation.
특히 요즘 우리 경제와 민생이 어렵고 또 남북 관계를 비롯해서 국제 정세가 아주 급변하고 있는 그런 상황이기 때문에 협치를 바라는 그런 국민들의 기대가 매우 높습니다. 오늘 그 기대에 부응하는 그런 저희가 되었으면 합니다.
The goal is to hold the joint consultative meeting once every quarter in the interests of joint governance by the ruling and opposition parties and the government, as the president had initially proposed. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, while her husband is right here in Seoul taking care of pressing domestic issues, South Korea's First Lady, Kim Jong-sook, is in India for a 4-day visit. On Monday, she had the opportunity to sit down with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun reports.
When she first visited India in July along with her husband, First Lady Kim Jong-suk's itinerary was mostly comprised of cultural events. But this time, Kim is visiting the country on her own as the official representative of South Korea discussing state affairs. She has become the first South Korean First Lady in 16 years to visit a foreign state without the president. On Monday, she had a one-on-one with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the person who personally invited her to India. According to a statement released by the Blue House, First Lady Kim first expressed her gratitude for India's hospitality, especially in terms of protocol and security. She then relayed President Moon's desire to continue his partnership and cooperation with Prime Minister Modi. Kim said President Moon strongly believes his effort to expand South Korea's diplomatic horizon with Southeast Asian countries, also known as the New Southern Policy, as well as Modi's Act East policy to enhance India's relations with Asia-Pacific countries, can create incredible synergy. Prime Minister Modi, in return, called President Moon a true friend and partner and also expressed his wish to visit South Korea soon. First Lady Kim also highlighted the long-lasting friendship between the two countries by mentioning Ho Hwang-ok, the Indian wife of the founding ruler of Korea's ancient Kaya kingdom, and discussed with the Indian Prime Minister ways to promote people-to-people exchanges between Seoul and New Delhi. Kim will attend a special ceremony to commemorate Ho Hwang-ok during her stay, as well as a lighting ceremony for India's Diwali Festival of Lights as a guest of honor. Earlier on Monday, First Lady Kim met with India's Minister of External Affairs, Sushma Swaraj, and had lunch with her Indian counterpart, Savita Kovind. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Saudi Arabia has told a UN human rights review that it's investigating the killing of a Saudi journalist at its Istanbul consulate, adding it will prosecute those responsible. For more on this story and other news from around the world, we are going to turn to our Kim Hae-sung, who's filling in for Noah Ram this morning. Hae-sung, international pressure keeps mounting on Riyadh.
That's right, Mark. The Saudi delegation at the first UN review of the kingdom's rights record in 5 years was grilled by member states on Monday. The delegation was headed by Bandar al-Aiban, who said the Saudi king had personally ordered a probe into the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has already expressed its regret and pain for the death of Jamal Khashoggi. King Abdulaziz has already instructed the prosecution to proceed with the investigation into this case according to the applicable laws, in preparation to reaching all facts and bring all the perpetrators to justice in order to bear the facts to the public.
More than 40 member states, including the United States, called on Saudi Arabia to carry out a thorough and transparent investigation, with many also calling for reform to the kingdom's freedom of expression laws. Aiban gave no details on the status or whereabouts of the 18 Saudi nationals detained in connection with the case and declined to answer journalists' questions about them. Riyadh is under intense global pressure to give a credible account of Khashoggi's killing and to reveal where his body is. Khashoggi's sons issued an emotional appeal on Monday for the return of their father's body. Turkey believes Khashoggi's body was dismembered, while other reports suggest it was dissolved in acid. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech on Monday at the opening ceremony of the first China International Import Expo in Shanghai. His main focus was on free trade, but he couldn't stop himself aiming a few subtle digs at his U.S. counterpart's leadership style. Lee Seung-jae reports.
With the first China International Import Expo taking place in Shanghai, Chinese President Xi Jinping was on hand to deliver a keynote speech at the opening ceremony. Greeted by a number of foreign leaders, President Xi welcomed the world to the expo.
On behalf of the Chinese government, the Chinese people, and in my own name, I hereby extend my cordial welcome to the guests who have arrived here and express my sincere greetings and best wishes to the friends from the 5 continents.
During his 30-minute speech, President Xi focused on various issues such as economic globalization, common efforts to maintain free trade, and the multilateral trading system. But more importantly, President Xi promised to open the Chinese economy further to international investment.
China's opening door will not be closed, but will become wider and wider. China will never stop her steps to push forward an opening up at a higher level, the building of an open world economy, and the construction of a community with a shared future for mankind.
With the United States notably absent, President Xi took the opportunity to criticize President Trump's leadership style, saying that as globalization deepens, the practices of law of the jungle and winner-take-all are a dead end. The remarks come as the two leaders are set to meet this month at the G20 summit in Argentina. President Xi, however, gave few signs that he's in the mood to make significant concessions. Watchers say while President Xi's speech covered important issues like free trade and intellectual property protection, everything will fall on deaf ears unless Beijing backs up its words with concrete actions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Nearly 80 children from a boarding school in Cameroon have been kidnapped by armed men. The attackers raided the school in Bamenda, the capital of the English-speaking Northwest region, on Sunday night. They also took a principal, a teacher, and a driver. The kidnappers are yet to demand a ransom, and police are looking for the children. Separatists in Cameroon have been pushing for English-speaking regions to secede for decades, protesting against President Paul Biya's French-speaking government and its perceived marginalization of the English-speaking minority. After teasing fans with a reunion for years, the Spice Girls are finally returning to the stage. It won't be a complete reunion, however, as the iconic British 90s pop group will be without Posh Spice Victoria Beckham. The quartet of Melanie Brown, Emma Bunton, Jerry Horner, and Mel C will kick off the tour at Manchester's Etihad Stadium on June the 1st next year. They'll also perform in Coventry, Sunderland, Edinburgh, and Bristol before finishing off at London's Wembley Stadium. Tickets will go on sale this Saturday.
Good morning. Most parts of Korea are trapped under a cloud of dust due to stagnant airflow and more toxic smoke from China. So a face mask is a must on a day like today, with an ultra-fine dust advisory in place in Chungcheongnam-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces. And regions in the east will see showers from the afternoon that will help to relieve the dryness in the air, while the rest of the country will still be covered with a thick blanket of dust. And Seoul will also see light rain tomorrow dawn, but that's not going to help much. But Heavy showers on Thursday will wash away the dust. And despite the rain, temperatures will remain on the milder side. And even today, temperatures will be quite bearable. But, going for an afternoon stroll is definitely not recommended. But those in Ulsan and Busan should enjoy clear skies, but check the dust levels before heading out. Single-digit morning lows will jump into the upper teens and low 20s again today. Seoul will reach up to 17 degrees. Gyeongju, Gwangju, and Jeju will top out at 20 degrees. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to Arirang TV. Lots more coming up, including our next newscast. That's happening at noon Korea time, around an hour and a half from now, with our very own E.G. Yoon. So until then, goodbye.
'18 Overseas TV Audience Survey.